I'm going to start in a way I usually try to avoid, but let's do it anyway. And that's just with a short quote. Esther Perel likes to talk about how separateness is a precondition for connection. She goes on to discuss that there's a need for distance between ourselves and the people that we want to have sex with, that there's something of a need to create a little bit of like mental separation and even objectify our sexual partners. Now, I'm really oversimplifying her writing. I would definitely encourage people to take a look at some of her work. But I
Yes.
wanted to hear from the two of y'all how that idea really landed with you, if that felt uncomfortable, or if that idea of being willing to objectify somebody that you are making love with or, aggressively fucking, if that was problematic at all.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about that. So for me, I think, it's interesting because there's also something Dan Savage sort of says the same stuff whenever I listen to his show, where it's like, we don't want to be objectifying like women or like an entire gender of people or something like that. And then like discounting that they are also people. But I think that like we do want to find some kind of a balance, because when you are with a person, I know sometimes I do want to be seen as an object, or I want to be used as an object, because that makes me feel like attractive or sexualized, like I am being sexualized, I'm being desired in this objectifying way. And I think so sometimes there is something like that will add to the experience. I think if we can like see our partner just as a sexual object for this time, then we can have like a different kind of sex. And I think also it falls into that sort of like Madonna whore aspect, where if you you've known someone, you've been intimate with your partner for decades or whatever, then you only want to treat them so gently and softly. But it's like, hey, maybe that person like wants to be objectified. And so I think we need to like make space for that sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I know that like when I was kind of coming into understanding my sexuality more deeply, I think I struggled that like some of the things that I wanted and that I liked and that I was into, I was like, oh no, am I contributing to some sort of like broader like misogynistic like trends by saying like I want to be objectified or like I want to be treated like that? I was really worried that like it was wrong in some capacity. And I think kind of reaching that stage of sexual liberation where I can let myself be an object and where I can objectify my partner in that sort of like romantic, like I'm putting you on this sort of pedestal for like achieving my own like sexual satisfaction. It is, I think, a beautiful thing, really. And that definitely we have to be careful with it. I don't want to cross any lines of making people feel bad about themselves, but yeah, I think in certain contexts, it's necessary.
Yeah. So then when we are talking about pornography, I recognize that we don't necessarily want to see the performers on screen as like somebody's child. And, when we're like getting all worked up, we don't necessarily want to be stressed out about whether or not the people were having a good day on set. But we also don't want to forget that these are human beings. Is there a healthy way to strike that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be surprised how many people like having a bit more of an intimate connection with their performers. But I also think that it's like maybe not good for us to, and maybe Sinn, you have a different perspective on this, but I think it's maybe good to not avoid that awareness that this person is someone's daughter or son or whoever, and that this person like maybe didn't have a good day on set, because that's the reality. Like sex work's like any other job. It's not always
Yes.
perfect, and we're
Yes.
human beings. And I think maybe
Yes.
that can go quite a long way to humanizing us and our interactions if people could sit with that feeling and that discomfort a little.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. I think that it's like, yeah, that term is specifically too, where it's like, oh, well, this is someone's daughter. Okay, well, I realize that some people might need that in order to have any kind of empathy, but it's like, if we can try, okay, so maybe it's not someone's daughter. Do they not then deserve to be respected as a human being? So that's, I feel like one should think, hey, these are human beings, and can they think that and also be turned on and also jerk off and get off and enjoy what they're seeing sexually? Like, why can't we do those things and still see them as an object and still see them as a person? I feel like we can get there. We can be mature enough to do both things.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, that if you are old enough to be, buying and consuming pornography, that you should be old enough to be able to hold those two different ideas in your mind at the same time. But
Yeah.
I know that our culture doesn't really teach that very well. I mean,
No,
Arden, you kind of
terrible.
alluded to this, but like modern porn is so much more interactive and consumer facing than say like a blockbuster movie. There's an expectation that you are able to like reach out and talk to the performers in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect with, an Avenger or, some big sort of movie star in that way. People want to
And
be able to like chat and tweet and make special requests and all these things. How do we navigate that as consumers in a way that's really respectful? I mean, do you have any tips for how people can, write those request emails or send those tweets without being an asshole?
yeah, I mean, just don't be an asshole. I mean, because it's like what you were saying is very true. I can't just like hop on Twitter and tweet at like Robert Downey Jr. and have a conversation with him, but you can hop on Twitter and tweet at Sinn and we'll talk. And anymore, it's like my business relies on that. I have to have these conversations. I have to be accessible to everyone. My email address has to be out there in the world so that I get paying clients for custom videos or for fans to join my sites and stuff like that. It's the only way. And that does make it difficult. There are definitely times when I'm like, gosh, if I was a little bit more famous, I'd have these kind of like personal protections that I don't because, just like lack of access and money for that sort of thing and power. But at the same time, like I'm just the right amount of famous now where like I still do get these like online harassers and these people who, mistreat us and stuff. So, and I see how painful that can be. And I don't want more of that. So it's just kind of like a weird thing you got to live with. And, oftentimes people are super friendly and kind and respectful. And then just like anything else in life, you're going to encounter people who are just don't know how to be that way.
Yeah. Cosigned. All of it.
Yeah. And Arden, I wanted to say something to what you spoke about before. Like, is it okay for me to be turned on by these things that feel misogynistic or feel, wrong or whatever? And because I have lots of those sort of kinks as well. And I grappled with it for a while before I was just like, hey, this is me and what I like. It's a fantasy. I don't want these things to happen in reality. And that is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to touch on like Esther Perel in that real quick, because I think we're all fanning over Esther Perel right now.
Oh,
like
God, love
something
her.
that totally freed my mind was when she was talking about this woman who she was interviewing that felt bad about this fantasy she had of like, I probably won't get into details because it's graphic and I don't want to like trigger anyone in the audience or whatever.
Consensual,
but it was
non-consent.
yeah. And her main thing was that like, I know you feel guilty about this, but like you have casted every one of those people in your head. You casted who did that to you. You decided what happened. Like,
Yes.
well, the fantasy has these elements of like consensual non-consent. Like fundamentally, you are there for and excited about everything that's happening. And yeah, that was such a powerful message to walk away with.
Yeah, she's so smart.
Yeah, I really hate that kind of carelessly thrown around idea that the person with the true power in the scene is actually the sub because they have the ability to, turn it off. I feel like I hear that phrase a lot, but there's at least some truth to that there when we are talking about a consensual non-consent or really
Yeah.
any of these other more like edge play or kind of darker, more shadow self type of fantasies.
Yes.
It's a fantasy that you are creating and consenting to. And I know I've said this on this show before, but we don't have these same types of like hand-wringing, anxious conversations when it comes to violent video games, when it comes to watching like incredibly graphic violence in film. Why is it that we are so uncomfortable with having that type of like dirty sex when we're perfectly okay with, teenagers blowing each other's heads off in virtual reality.
And reality, sorry to say.
Yeah, there's truth
Apparently
to
we're
that.
okay with that because nothing happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what you're speaking to now, it's something that's been just like so frustrating with all of these the MasterCard rules, because I have so many clips that are custom videos people ordered. And, there's a certain extent where I'm like, I get it. Like, I can't show, a throat being slit, even though it's fantasy, even though it's fake, even though I'm just making a movie. Like, I can't do that. No blood on this. Okay, fine. I can do that. But
I mean,
now
you
with
can do
these,
that in a student film, or even
yes, you
honestly in like kind of a
can.
mediocre YouTube video, let alone a
Yep.
Hollywood blockbuster. But I
Yep.
didn't mean to interrupt your point.
Oh, no, you're okay. But yes, exactly. And so that's so frustrating that, like, but when I try to make my own little films just because there's like a nipple in it or something, well, now, MasterCard is like, the rules now are so strict. Like, I shoot a lot of wrestling content, let's say, fantasy wrestling content. And when you shoot fantasy wrestling, then sometimes like the other person gets knocked out or like choked out. And then they pretend to be like they're passed out and I'm the winner. And that's how the video ends. Well, now they're like, oh, they were whining and crying and we can't show this excessive crying or showing that they're in pain. If they got choked out, they have to be shown conscious again before the video ends, or we won't post it. You won't be able to post it and all this stuff. And so it's just like the rules are getting like tighter and tighter for the type of content we can even sell. Whereas, if I could just talk to these credit card companies and be like, how is this any different than I'm sure people use your credit cards to go to movie theaters and watch this happening there. So why is it not okay just because I'm on a smaller scale making the same types of things? I think it's
It's
really
so strange that you have
problematic.
to like keep kosher in that way. You're
Oh my
allowed to
gosh.
have bloody violence, or you're allowed to have hot sex, but you're not allowed to combine the two at any time.
Right, even though it's very clearly a fantasy. Or, it's totally okay to have, 10 guys, cocks in one asshole, but, the second you show like a fainting fetish or something, well, now it's off limits. And I'm saying all that should be fine. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, before we really get into the meat of this discussion, I wanted to ask about like specific types of performers. Obviously, supporting women of color or trans women or disabled women in porn means seeking out and buying their content. When does that become problematic? Or is there an upward limit on fetishizing particular body types?
Uh, can you elaborate a little on that?
Yeah, I just think
Yeah.
about, when you log on to some sort of tube site and you see like all Asian women, or when you see something that, there are a lot of slurs that refer to women with disabilities, or to trans women, or
trans
things
women.
like that. And
Yeah.
we're going to be talking in particular about trans women and how erotic media or pornography deals with trans bodies. But I guess I'm curious where that appreciation versus like fetishization, if it can become problematic, or what that would even look like.
Oh, definitely. Right. I mean, I feel like that this is super common that it crosses certain lines. Like it's difficult because, there's the sexual liberation part of me that wants to say like, hey, whatever you're into, like that's what you're into and that's okay. But when like expressing what you're into becomes a process of like projecting that onto someone because they might fit a category that you like a trans person or an Asian person or whatever, that's kind of where I see the issues. Like, for example, people assume because I'm a trans woman making adult content that they can expect certain things in my content, or that like, oh, if I just ask for this, I will get it because it's a trans body in porn. And it's like there's no consideration for like the person, me, who maybe my body doesn't work like that, or maybe I'm not into that. You don't know me, there are so many pieces there where people aren't really seeing you as a person creating content, but as like a vehicle for their fantasy. And it's hard. There's a lot of gray there. I think it when you see it, but it's not always super clear.
Yeah, and I agree with that on so many levels, obviously, but it's the same. Just it is hard when it's like we're talking about people of color, or what we were just saying. It's because you know if you are an Asian person, for example, you know that you can tag your content like with these certain tags, and
Mm.
it'll reach the eyes of the people who want to be seeing those things. But then at the same time, that maybe you're resistant to that because as a human being that's not like the only representation of who you are. So when it comes to like monetizing these things, it's really hard to figure out like what is okay, and at which point am I just being like perpetuating something that I'm against. um
Mm.
and I don't think there's an easy answer for that shit.
No.
But I love what you said to Arden about as a trans woman, that there are things that people go to you and they're like, well, why can't you make a video where you do this? And just in a little bit of like solidarity, only because people come to me a lot and they're like, wow, your ass is so big and beautiful. So where's that anal scene? And I'm just like, I can't do that. So like, if you got to know me a little bit, you would know this thing about me.
Yeah.
And so like that for me, when I try to create, I want to do it in a way that is like representative of a real human being. So when I work with a trans performer, I sit down, we talk beforehand, and like maybe I should even like film this conversations and include them or share them, because it's like this is what everyone should be doing, all
Mm.
whatever the sex you're having. But to be able to have that conversation before with someone and be like, hey, how do you like to have sex? What do you like to do? How do you like to be treated? How do you like to use these parts of your body? And I'm like, we will do that thing. We will do what you like. Like, it doesn't have to, again, like porn is very much about ticking these boxes. Mainstream porn, it's like you work with trans, this is how it has to go.
Hmm.
Whereas you work with me and I'm like, let's do what you like. And that's what we'll do. And it'll be fine. And people buy it and they want to see it. So
Yeah, they
Sure.
definitely do.
yeah.
I liked Arden's all you know it when you see it kind of standard, because
Yeah.
I don't want to make any sort of rule that says that if you are attracted to we've been talking in particular about Asian women. If you're attracted to Asian women and you gravitate towards that sort of content, that's totally fine and great and wonderful. If you are maybe exclusively seeking out that content, as a therapist, I would encourage you to perhaps be mindful and to maybe diversify your diet a little bit. I think that that's just good advice across the board in life, but particularly when we're talking about pornography and things along those lines. But where it gets really tricky is that piece where you start to sort of assume, well, because you're this, then you must also be that, and you
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
projecting that. Is that maybe the line that y'all would draw?
Yeah, I think at least for me personally, definitely it's the shorthanded expectation, and like I'm forgiving too. If somebody comes in,
Yes.
they say like they want this or whatever, and I'm like, hey, actually, I don't do that. That doesn't work for me. Most people will be totally chill. They'll be like, oh, cool, no big deal. How about this? And then we can do that instead. But I think
Awesome.
it's more when people are like just entitled and upset
Yes.
that they don't get what they want
Yes.
from my body. I'm like, that's interesting. I don't know why you think that's gonna make me suddenly on your side, but
Back
all
to the
right.
don't be an asshole standard. Got it.
Yeah.
Yes. It's not that hard. Back in the 90s, we had these bumper stickers that say, don't be a dick. Like, we need to bring that back.
Yeah.